Buonasera a tutti. Welcome, benvenuti. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Romina Montanari. I'm the Food and Wine Event Manager for the Italian Cultural Center. That is the prime non-profit organization dedicated to the promotion of the Italian language and culture in the Twin Cities. Today we're presenting a wine education class. It's called Le Vie del Vino and the wines of Irpinia in Campania. The wine education will be expertly led by Tom Hyland. He's a freelance wine writer, educator, and photographer specializing in Italian wine. He has visited Italy more than 75 times over the last 20 years. He has written about Italian wines for numerous publications, including the Wine Searcher, Forbes, and Decanter in England. He has co-authored 2 books on Italian wine, and he currently publishes a subscription publication called Italian Wine Report that features reviews of several hundred Italian wine each issue. So welcome, Tom. Thank you for being here.
Grazie.
And everyone to meet here.
Romina, thank you for that nice introduction. And ciao a tutti. Welcome to our seminar tonight on Irpinia. And the first thing I want to say, well, actually, before we start, is we're going to have time, we hope, at the end for some questions. But if you do have any questions along the way, feel free to put them, in the chat box, the Q&A box, depending on what version of Zoom you have. But if I might mention something that I think I know that everybody knows, and you might not understand it. So it's best not to go for 40 minutes working on something that you don't understand. So please go ahead and do that, and I'll be happy to answer the questions. Irpinia, I would say that if you went to a very good wine store in your area and you walked in and you said, I'd like to try some wines from Irpinia, they might look at you funny. They might look at you like you're speaking a different language or from a different planet or whatever, but Irpinia is a territory in Campania. And then we'll talk about Campania in a larger scale here, but that's one reason why people haven't heard of the wines. You can put it in your chat box here, or you can raise your hands. I see some of you, but I'm sure many of you have been to Campania, right? And whether you've been there or not, every region in Italy, every region everywhere has certain images. So when we talk about Campania, what do you think of? You think of Napoli, right? And how beautiful that city is right by the Gulf of Napoli. Probably think of pizza when you're in Napoli. And then a little bit south of Napoli, of course, is the Amalfi Coast, which is one of the most gorgeous spots on the planet. Not far from Napoli, the other direction is Pompeii. So you've got this natural beauty, you've got this fantastic history. It's not a region that people think about for wine, at least not the general public. People, you mentioned Italian wine to people, they think of Tuscany, think of Piedmont, maybe Verona, the Veneto region for Prosecco and Amarone and things like that. And if you're from a particular region, your ancestors are from Marche or Abruzzo or something, you would know those regions. But Campania is not that well known for wine. And so Irpinia, since it's not along the sea like Napoli, but it's a good 30 miles away, inland, is away from a lot of the tourists. So it's a real destination. But I think with these destinations, it's like going to visit the Barolo zone up in Piedmont. It's a bit of a trip to get there, but you go there for a specific region. You want to taste these wines and enjoy the local food. So with that, you won't be seeing me for about an hour here. We're going to go into a PowerPoint presentation. I'm a photographer as well. And find the share here. There we go. Okay. We'll do the PowerPoint with, these are all going to be my photos here. So Irpinia in Campania. So there we go. This is a picture of a vineyard in Irpinia. Irpinia is, this little town is called San Michele di Serino. And I just want to get the lay of the land here. You see this beautiful day with the clouds and you see the mountains there. You're 30 miles from the coast. These are what are known as the Picentini Mountains. So absolutely beautiful, beautiful land. One of the reasons that Irpinia is not well known is because it's not the name of a recognized name of one of the provinces of Campania, okay? Here's a map showing the 5 provinces of Campania. You have on the orange there on the top left, in the northwest part of Campania, is Caserta. All 5 of these provinces produce wine, by the way. Caserta is very famous also for its production of bufala mozzarella. And of course, we have the province of Naples. And of course, the Amalfi Coast is down there, the Sorrentino Peninsula. You have the province of Salerno in the orange there in the south. Again, beautiful wines. Up in the north, you have Benevento, a lot of very, very famous Falanghina and some Aglianico planted there. Then you have the province of Avellino, okay? What we're talking about tonight is basically the province of Avellino. It's known as Irpinia by the producers. But if you did a Google search and you said map of Campanian provinces, you probably would not see the word Irpinia. You would see these words, Caserta, Benevento, Avellino, Salerno, and Napoli. Irpinia then is a name that's a historic name for the territory. It's the name used by wine producers. So if you're not into wine, you probably won't hear of Irpinia. So why did they call it Irpinia? Well, number one, it's the province of Avellino, but as we'll see in a few minutes here, there's a city called Avellino. So that avoids some confusion there. And then there's a famous wine called Fiano di Avellino. So it makes sense for them to use a different name. So Irpinia is the name, okay? The other, to give you an idea where we're at here, of course, I think you all know we don't have the big map of Italy, but we're in the southwestern part of Italy. There's a Tyrrhenian Sea that Napoli and Salerno border on. Over in the pink, over in the far right on the bottom, is the province of Basilicata. They have some superb reds. And then the bluish teal region there is Puglia, okay? There's another shot, very similar to the first one. Irpinia is an ancient word in the local dialect that means wolf. And you see that symbol sometimes for Irpinia. We're talking about settling, the Irpinians settling there as early as the 6th century BC. It's very limited in its population and its urbanization. There's 110 provinces in Italy. This is the 62nd most densely populated. So that's not very much. And the reason for that is because you have a lot of valleys and plateaus that are crisscrossed by lakes and rivers and streams. So it's a topography that defines that. There's the Picentini Mountains, and you get a lot of rainfall. This is one of the rainiest territories in Italy. They get 50 inches of rain in a typical year. And so for that, because there's so much rain, you know, it's a wonderful place to produce, you know, especially some beautiful whites. It can be very hot down in Campania, and I'm sure any of you that have been to southern Italy know how hot it can get. You know, obviously, you get down to Sicily, it gets ridiculously hot in July and August. But even here in Irpinia, in Campania, I remember visiting a vineyard one time with some producers. We were seeing this beautiful vineyard where they produce white wine. They grew grapes to produce white wine. And this was about 10 o'clock in the morning in June. So not quite the height of summer yet, but we were in summer. And it was, and after 15 minutes, my t-shirt was just drenched. I must have picked up 5 extra pounds of just sweat. It was just, and I'm thinking, if that's 10 in the morning, what must it be like at like 2 in the afternoon, 3 in the afternoon? Of course, nobody's working at that time because it's just impossible to work that time of the day, which leads me to a little nickname for southern Italy, of which Irpinia is part of. It's called Il Pomeriggio, which means the afternoon. And the joke by the northern Italians is that southern Italy is called Il Pomeriggio because nobody works until the afternoon. So a lot of little local jokes there between the north and the south. So, but there's a lot of work that gets done. But they will start at vineyard working at 7 in the morning, go until about 10, and then take their time off in the afternoon, and then start up again at like maybe 4 or 5 in the afternoon and work till very late at night. So, but that's a great picture of the topography there. So one of the reasons that Irpinia is not that well known is it has what I mentioned here is the history of isolation. You're between 2 seas. Okay, you've got the Tyrrhenian Sea to the west and the Adriatic Sea to the east. They call it, and I read one article, I like this term, they call it the Middle Earth. It's a great wealth of biodiversity. It's not just grapevines. And really until, you know, if you've been to southern Italy and really much of it, except for a few big towns, still a lot of very small roads. There aren't, you know, the A1 now goes from Napoli, or A1 goes from Napoli up to not Milan, but I think Torino, if I'm correct, up in Piemonte. But you had to use these old roads, the Appian Way, which is there in white, that would get you all the way up to Rome. It's down in Puglia here also, but, and the other road would be the Appia Traiana, which would also get you to Rome. But so it was very slow going. You weren't able to ship too many things out of Campania. It was, taking your horse and buggy and everything and shipping things that way. So they were kind of, by themselves there. That's another reason why you don't hear much about them. Okay. However, there's been a big explosion lately in terms of wine, and we'll talk about that with a few producers, but look at these two graphs here, okay? Registered bottling companies in Irpinia. Back in 1900, the number was 3, okay? By 1985, 85 years later, it had only jumped up to 6. I mean, you really couldn't find wines from Irpinia for a long time, really almost outside of the territory, but certainly in the United States. Now look at 2012. Now you've got 136 different bottling companies, producers, wine producers, if you will. So there's been a huge renaissance, and these wines are becoming more and more popular. They're still not as well known as they should be, but they're getting a lot of great press, and people are trying these wines, especially the white wines. We'll talk about that in great detail. There's a corresponding graph there of the vines planted in acreage. This is for DOP wines. Those are things like Greco di Tufo and Fiano di Avellino and Tarazzi and Aglianico and Falanghina and many other things. So in 1975, there were 481 acres planted. Like 20 years later, the number had gone up to 2,417. By 2008, you're at over 9,000. By 2018, 11,000. So it's just in the last 43 years, it's jumped up dramatically. So a lot of renewed interest, a real renaissance in wines of Irpinia. Okay. One of the great things, one of the charming things I love about Irpinia is that this is not like, certainly not like Napa Valley or Bordeaux or Burgundy. And it's not like parts of Tuscany or Piemonte or some of the bigger, the more well-known wine regions in Italy, in that you don't have these huge vineyards that go on for 30 acres, 20 acres, whatever it may be, with all these ordered rows of vines. You find these little pockets, these little parcels of vines. This I found, I took a picture of. I just love this is certainly doesn't look like anything you'd see in California or in Burgundy, or I said even in some of the bigger parts of Italy. This is a little town called Montefusco, where they grow Greco to make a wine called Greco di Tufo. It's just this little vine. You see the wooden poles there. It's just, you get the real charm of ancient viticulture in Irpinia, as you do in Sicily as well. Sicily and Campania kind of fight for that title of which one was the made wine first. I think Sicily probably rightfully has that title, but Irpinia they were producing wine there over 5,000 years ago. So been around a long, long time. But I just love this view. And again, and as you'll see, we're on a sloping hill here. The vineyards aren't planted up on the mountains too much, but they are on these hillsides, and you'll find that everywhere. That the hillside vineyards produce much better wines. When they get all this rain, it has to go somewhere, and if it's on a valley floor, it just sits there, and you get kind of stunted growth. Here you get very, very good growth, and you get a lot more character in the wine. So this is one of the charms of that. And tradition is a big, important word. Tradition and heritage are big, important words throughout most of Italy when we're talking about wine, but especially here in Irpinia. We'll talk about the grape types, but we're using ancient grape types, making wines, and they're still making relevant wines. Sometimes you think, oh, tradition's a bad thing, but tradition, as I've said quite often, and as has been defined by other people, it's not something where you're stuck in the past. Tradition is a moving target. So you can make wines that are relevant by using vines that were first planted 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago. Here's another side of a little hillside vineyard. We're going to talk tonight about a very, very famous winery that's very successful called Feudi, or as they pronounce it there, Faudi, F-E-U-D-I, Feudi di San Gregorio. And this is a vineyard just next to the winery. Again, on the sloping hillside there, you see the mountains in the background. You can see a little bit of fog in the center of the picture there. I got this picture about 5 minutes too late. The fog was coming up, and we're trying to get your camera set and everything. But this is a vineyard called Pietra Calda, which means, anybody in Italian want to say this? Romina, you can't do that. You know what this means. But Pietra Calda means warm or hot stone. So around the world, you see this in many places in cool climates where they have stones or rocks, and it radiates the sun's heat. So it gives them a little bit extra ripening. But I thought a very, very pretty vineyard. This is a vineyard of Fiano at Fiuti di San Gregorio. This is a vineyard of Fiano from Mastro Berardino, and you see some of the oak vines have been ripped out there. This was taken near sunset. Again, just one of these little hillsides, these little pockets that are kind of hidden. You have to kind of drive a long way to find them, but I think just, it gives you an idea of what the viticulture there is all about. This is a little more modern. This is in a town called Montefalcione. This is the entrance to a winery called Donna Chiara we're going to talk about tonight. This is one of their Fiano vineyards. So like a little more of the modern planting there, but still an ancient vine. And you see these beautiful pine trees all over Campania as well, and Irpinia. So, okay, let's start with the white grapes. And the two most important are Greco. And as you might imagine from that word Greco, it was named for the Greeks that planted it, that colonized Campania. So Greco for Greco di Tufo, and then Fiano is a wine that's used for Fiano Diavolino and some other things as well. And in a lesser degree, you have a grape called Falanghina, which is actually planted in all 5 provinces of Irpinia, all 5 provinces of Campania. It's the only grape that's found in all 5 provinces. It makes a very high acid white, and that's becoming very, very popular lately. And then this last one, which I love the name, it's called Coda di Volpe, which in Italian means tail of the fox. And I think you can even, maybe if you think about it a little bit, maybe drink a little wine, it might help your imagination, but it does look a little bit, these clusters look like a tail of an animal, and they decided to look like a tail of a fox. So that's where the name comes from. So let's start by talking about Greco di Tufo. I don't know how many people have a glass of wine tonight. I'm going to pull out one here very soon, but the Greco di Tufo is one of the 2 most famous wines in Irpinia, 2 most famous wines in Campania, one of the most famous wines in Italy. And I have to say this, and I always think we need to emphasize this, but it's one of the great wines of Italy. And when I say that, it's one of the great wines of the world. I think there's been so much attention paid, of course, to France and the history of France. You can understand that. And certainly lately with domestic wines from California, that's taken up a lot of press as well. But over the last 15, 20 years, there's been a lot more press about Italy, and not just Tuscany and Piemonte, but now Campania is starting to see a lot more press as well. So this particular wine, Greco di Tufo, it's like a lot of different names in Italy, like you see Barbera d'Alba or Barbera d'Asti from Piemonte. The name of the grape, Barbera d'Alba, from the town of Alba, or from Asti. This is Greco, the name of the grape, from Tufo. What is Tufo? Tufo is the name of a village. And then the village is named for the fact that it has what are called tufaceous soils. The gentleman you see on the right side of the picture here is a winemaker named Vincenzo Mercurio. And we stopped while he was taking me around, and he said, this is what Tufo is all about. So you see this wall here, he grabbed some of the soil and just, and broke it up in his hands, and he's holding it there. That's tufaceous soil. It's clay that's broken up very easily. And it is been determined that this adds sort of a special characteristic, sort of what they call this minerality to the white wine. It gives Greco di Tufo its very particular distinctiveness. The picture on the left is one of the villages where Greco di Tufo was made. It's called Montefusco. There are 8 villages in all where Greco di Tufo was made. Again, like in many parts of Italy, like if you were to try Barolo, Barolo is not just from the village of Barolo. Barolo can be from a total of 11 different villages, but Barolo lends its name to the wine. Tufo lends its name to the wine here. So, and you can see how heavily invested they are in viticulture. You can see all the vines here. You see a few olive trees kind of sticking out in the background there, but just vine after vine after vine of Greco. Okay. There's one of the most famous vineyards. It's called Cutizzi. I don't have a picture on in the slideshow, but this is from Fiuti di San Gregorio. And they were one of the first ones to make Greco di Tufo as a single vineyard here. So I took this in the spring, see these beautiful flowers, the poppies and the broom in the background. And that's planted just to Greco, and it's a property of Fiuti di San Gregorio to make this. I can never get this straight. There we are. This wine called Cutizzi, C-U-T-I-C-C-I, which unfortunately the importer does not bring that in. We're going to talk about the regular Greco di Tufo, but it's normally run for restaurants anyway. But it's a fabulous wine. It's really one of the best examples of Greco di Tufo. So The other big white that's important there, and one other point about Greco di Tufo, if you read a little bit about this, many of the winemakers say that it's a white wine masquerading as a red. In other words, it's a very full-bodied white. It almost has a little bit of a tannic bite to it, and it's got very high acid to it. And so they call that their white wine masquerading as a red. It's the white wine trying to be a red, if you will. Both of these wines offer great freshness. And what you get when you have wines that have great freshness, white or red, is the wines that have very high acidity to them. Sometimes they can scare people off. They think of acidity, they think of acetic, and maybe it's a little bit too bitter or too sharp. And it can be in a very cold vintage. But what that acidity does, like just getting, you know, some fruit at the local supermarket, you want something that's got a lot of freshness to it, whether it's an orange or an apple, all different types of acidity, or grapefruit or pineapple, whatever it is. If it doesn't have that acidity, it's going to taste flabby, it's going to taste flat. It's not going to age very long. And when we talk about wines, these are white wines that can age 5, 7, 10 years. I've had examples that have been 20 years old that are in great shape. So Fiano di Avellino, this is one of the villages here. There are 26 villages. So it's much easier to find Fiano di Avellino. It's a much larger production. This is a small town, small village, and you see the ancient buildings there called Candida, C-A-N-D-I-D-A. Tiny little village. I just saw this. I had to get a picture of this, not only for the hillside town of those old buildings, but you see the vineyard there. Again, we're not talking about a modern vineyard here. These poles, these wooden poles that support the vines. So, and you know, they don't do much with the grass. They just let it grow naturally. So that's part of the charm of that. I love that. It's, you know, I've been able to travel to so many places around the world, thankfully, and you see a lot of modernism, and that's to be expected. So it's nice to kind of take a step back into time here. That's kind of what Irpinia is all about, at least in my way of looking at things. So other whites from Campania include Falanghina. You see a wine there from Mastro Berardino they call Mora Bianca, which is the name of their resort. Irpinia Falanghina, you see the label there, it's the DOC wine. Falanghina, it's very high acid to it. And until a few years ago, this was sort of a forgotten varietal. But as I said, it's now planted in all 5 provinces, and there's a lot more work done with Falanghina. They have new clones. They take some of the best cuttings from the vines and they reproduce those cuttings. They take them to a nursery and they get, you know, new clones that work very well in a particular soil or climate. That's the Falanghina, and it has a lot of really strong, beautiful apple flavors to it. And it's become a really very successful wine by the glass pour in a lot of restaurants, not only in Italy and Europe, but in America as well. It's a wonderful wine for shellfish, absolutely just great. So the second white there, we talked about the Coda di Volpe before, the tail of the fox. You don't see too many producers make that on its own. There's a wonderful wine there. I don't know if anybody's been to Napoli and been to a local trattoria, and you probably will have a glass of a white wine called Lacrima Christi del Vesuvio. There actually is a white, a red, and a rosé, and the white is normally made from Coda di Volpe. The Lacrima Christi del Vesuvio, it's a clever story about the tears of Christ. Supposedly when he saw the Gulf of Napoli, he was so moved, God was so moved, or Christ was so moved to tears because he was so beautiful that one of his tears fell right on Napoli and blessed it and everything. So, but that's a wine that you see a few producers. This is Terra d'Ora di Paolo, which is actually part of the Mastro Berardino family. They split up a few years ago, and another fine producer as well. So you see that as well. Let's move on to the reds. And the 2 most important grapes, by far the most important grape is called Aglianico. And there's some people that believe that the name came from the word Hellenico, which is an adjective for Greece. Some people have debunked that. They say, oh, that's not true. But I like that legend, and a lot of people in the area still talk about it that way. So I think there's room for different meanings of this word. So again, it was the Greeks that planted these vines. You know, they first started planting these vines a good 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. There's another grape there called Piede Rosso, which I think all of you who know basic Italian knows that it means red feet. And it comes not only from the red stalks you see there, but the legend is that when the birds who love these grapes, because they're so sweet, when the birds go and sit on the stalks, they come away with red feet. So that's where the name comes from. And I love these names. So Aglianico is a grape type that is most famous for its use in a wine called Taurasi. We'll talk about that quite a bit. Taurasi is to Irpinia what Barolo is to Piedmont. It's what Brunello is to Tuscany. It's the most famous wine, not only for its complexity and its richness and its intensity, but also for its longevity. We'll talk in a few minutes about Taurasi. I mean, even an average Taurasi ages about 10 years. And in the best vintages, you can get wines that age 25, 30, 40, even 50 years. So, and if you really want to, if you ever get a chance to go there, if they ever let us go back, once this COVID thing is done, and I'm in Chicago and they're opening more and more restaurants and signs are encouraging. So well, now we have to see about the Italians letting people in, but things are different there, but we won't, that's a discussion for another day. But anyway, if you ever get a chance to go there and you really want to see old world, vineyards, and you want to see what the charm of tradition and heritage is all about in Irpinia, go to the Taurasi area. Again, that's the name of a town, and there are, I think, about 17 towns where you can make Taurasi, but it's generally 100% Aglianico. It has to be 85%, and you can blend in a little bit of Piede Rosso, but more and more producers, because Taurasi is a very rich wine, they want to make it as rich as possible. So they make it 100% Aglianico. And again, these vineyards, this charm, this old world kind of vineyard, this is a vineyard just outside the village of Taurasi. It's owned by Feudi di San Gregorio. I've got another shot of it here, but you see the hillsides in the background. You see more and more vineyards planted there. You see a few olive trees in the background. So very heavily into viticulture and agriculture. You see the natural grasses they leave there. This is not a pristine vineyard. This is a vineyard, the old wooden poles. This is a vineyard that's modeled after some of the older vineyards from 50, 100, 150 years ago. This is another shot of that same vineyard, more of a wild sauvage shot, if you will. The wild flowers, again, the wild natural grasses. It's called Vigneto Sala. And if you look closely, you can see the logo of Feudi di San Gregorio. They have this sign, this black sign up with the white printing in all of their vineyards. They own a lot of vineyards throughout the area. And if you look in the background there, you'll see all the way in the background, again, a hillside with more vineyards planted there. And in the middle of the picture, you see a trestle. These are the train tracks. And this is the main railway that goes to Avellino, the main city. And this has been used for over 150 years. Wineries and growers would grow their grapes, and you could put the grapes on a train or produce a little bit of wine and put the wine on a train, and the wine could be shipped, the grapes could be shipped to Avellino, and they would be shipped to other parts of Italy. So that's still a working railway. So, but that just gives you kind of an idea of some of the natural charm of what the Taurasi zone is all about. Here's the shot of a vine that you will not see anywhere else except Taurasi. This is a special kind of vine called Pergola Avellinesi, or Avellinesi, the adjective for Avellino. Pergola is a training system where the canopy, in other words, the leaves, cover up the grapes. If you look at a normal vine in Napa Valley or Tuscany or Bordeaux, you see leaves all along the side coming up from a few inches above the ground, and those leaves are there to cover the grapes. Well, here it gets so hot, what they do is they have the leaves on top. That's what pergola is all about. And there still are some people that plant this. They don't plant like this. This is a vine that I don't know exactly how it is. We found this field, I took this picture, but it's probably 80 to maybe 100 years old. You can see how thick those trunks are. You can see the vines, how gnarly they are, all the directions they go in. Nobody would plant like this anymore, but there are people that still use these vines, and they get just tremendous fruit. This is an example of what Taurasi is all about, and Aglianico, the ancient vines, are all about. And for a while there, one producer told me that they actually had legislation to eliminate those vines, and they actually did get rid of some of them. And there was enough of an outcry that enough producers said, that's not right. We need to keep our heritage. And not only that, but we just make great wine from these vines. So luckily that regulation was outlawed, and these vines still exist. Here's a great shot. It's kind of my postcard shot of a little town in the Taurasi zone called Paternopoli. And you can see the clouds in the background, and the Picentini Mountains, and the town there, the small town, and the trees. And you see, here's this vineyard. Again, it's this very quaint, very charming vineyard, the old-fashioned way of planting. It's not like a modern vineyard at all. but these vines belong to one particular producer. And I'll give you another shot here. There's a close-up of one of the vines, and this is something you don't see much anymore. These are vines. This one is at least 100 years old. It may be its oldest 120 years old. It may be older than that. It's hard to say. This belongs to a producer named Luigi Tecce. Makes Taurasi in extremely small quantities. I've been lucky enough to visit with him. The wine is phenomenal if you ever get a chance to find it. His name is Luigi Tecce, Tecce, and it's one of the highest praised examples of Taurasi every year. But just look at that vine. I mean, it does not look like a vine you've seen anywhere else in the world, does it? It's a huge, very thick tree trunk. You see how the vines go in all different sorts of directions. There's some canes there that spring out. And the thing about vines this old is that, as you can imagine, when you have vines that are over 100 years old, you don't produce much fruit, okay? Vines, wherever they're planted, they have a very small production for the first 5 or 10 years, and then they pick up in production for 15, 20, up till about 30 years. Then they sort of plateau off and then start to drop down. So once you get older than about 30 or 40 years, production starts to go down. And most places, if not all of them, most wineries are trying to make money. And so they don't really want to work with a lot of these vineyards. Some of them will work with them because they have older vines and they can put that on the label. In Italy, it's called vecchie vigne, older vines. And in Taurasi, this is, if it's not common, you see it more often here than you do anywhere else. But so when you have vines that are 100 years old, excuse me, you don't get much fruit, but the fruit you get is so concentrated and so powerful and has such expressive flavors to it that, you know, you can't replicate that. You can't replicate that. You get these tremendous wines. Yes, they're expensive to work with, and the wines that are made from these vines are very expensive, but they're phenomenal. So, excuse me. And I love how these vines are, you know, just surrounded by spring flowers. Again, you wouldn't see that in most places, but just a great example of what the heritage is all about in Irpinia and in Taurasi. So now we'll talk about Taurasi specifically in a minute. Those are expensive wines because they age so long. But Aglianico is made by a lot of producers and a much more reasonable priced wine. There are examples called Campania Aglianico and Irpinia Aglianico. Here's an example here from Feuuri. This is a wonderful value. It's called Rubrato. It's a proprietary name that they came up with. And another wine is called Campi Taurasini, so the country of the little Taurasi, if you will. And this is a wine from Antonio Caiciano. Romina, I think you're familiar with that producer. He's very famous for his Taurasi, and he produces another wine called Campi Taurasini. You can only release a Taurasi in its third year. So, you know, it's been said about a lot of famous red wines, you know, when you have to age them for a long time, you know, that's cash that you're tying up. So these producers realize that Taurasi, not only can you not release it for 3 years, but quite often it's not a wine you want to drink right away. You want to wait 4 or 5, 10 years to drink it. So we need to make some Aglianico that are examples that can be drunk a little bit sooner. So Campi Taurasini is sort of, I hate to use this term, but it's I guess it's good as anything, but kind of a baby Taurasi, if you will, or sort of a Taurasi light, if you will. And it's a wine that's about maybe $35 or $40 instead of $65, $70, $80 for a bottle of Taurasi. And yet it's the same area as Taurasi, basically, most of the same villages. It's again 100% Aglianico, and it's made in the same way. It just isn't aged quite as long, and they can release it after 2 years instead of 3 years. So it's a more approachable wine. It's a lovely wine, and the Campania Aglianico, the Irpinia Aglianico, those are even lighter. They don't have any really strong regulations. Some of them aren't even aged in oak, and those are more in the $15 to $20, $22 range. So those are great examples. If you like Aglianico, if you want to try a Taurasi, but it's not something you can afford very often at $50 or $75 a bottle, these are great examples of getting that Aglianico character without spending a lot of money. And these are 100% Aglianico as well. They're not blended with other grapes to make them lighter, but they're just made in style that you can drink them right away. So those are really highly recommended. So food pairings, we're kind of coming up with the visual here, are we? Oh, there we are, I'm sorry. Greco di Tufo, this was recommended to me by the head of Feuuri di San Gregorio. He recommends it with mozzarella. Who doesn't love mozzarella, right? He also recommends it with what he calls the Italian version of sushi. And we know that in Napoli, being right off the Gulf, they get a lot of wonderful fish. So marinated raw fish. One of my favorite dishes are those tiny sweet clams that they get from the Gulf of Napoli. They're called vongole, V-O-N-G-O-L-E. You have the spaghetti con vongole. Perfect match with Greco di Tufo, also Faggina, but that's a wonderful match. So, and he says also, he says Greco works with, because remember we talked about Greco being sort of a white wine that's masquerading as a red. Greco works really, really well with what he calls extreme dishes like bacala. Bacala is salt cod. And I've had bacala in different parts of Italy. I love it. I've had it up in the north where it's not so heavily salted, and I love that. Then I had the really traditional heavily salted style in Campania, and it's totally different. But that works really, really well with Greco di Tufo. We talked about this kind of this element of this minerality and this you know, from the Tufo soil that character you get in the wine. So that strong character really, really works well with a strong seafood like that. Greco, we also had, yeah, there's these this is the vongole, right? Tiziana or Romina, excuse me, yeah.
This is the
there's yeah. I'm sorry, there's the vongole. These were the little shrimp, right?
The kind of raw fish.
Okay, oh, the raw fish, right? I'm sorry. Okay, there's the vongole, the tiny sweet clams, the spaghetti con vongole, perfect match. And there's the bacala, okay? Fiano di Avellino, chicken, it works with beautifully with Fiano is actually a little bit richer on the palate. Greco may be a bigger wine in terms of its intensity, but in terms of being really ripe and lush on the palate. And it's a style that I think more Americans like. They prefer Fiano to Greco, where the Italians probably prefer Greco to Fiano. And that's just a general statement. It depends on the individual. I love both wines, but Fiano is definitely a lusher, riper, more forward wine. They both have excellent acidity. They both age for a long time, but so with a dish like roast chicken, it works out beautifully. Also, and if you can tell me what type of fish that is, I'm not sure, but that's a river fish, right?
Yes, it's a river fish.
Is that, do you know what type that is? Or?
No, the type.
Okay, that's all right, but we know that it works with river fish. So not river fish better than shellfish for Fiano di Avellino. The shellfish are better with Greco di Tufo. And it works beautifully. I don't know about in where you're at in Minneapolis or wherever you're watching, but in Chicago, there's a lot of Thai restaurants where you can bring your own bottle of wine. And that's one of my favorite things to do. So with Thai cuisine, with Asian cuisine, fusion cuisine, you see the shrimp there and the little you know, nuts and bok choy and things like that. Fiano works beautifully with that. So, okay, Aglianico for Taurasi. It works beautifully with lamb, really with almost just about any type of red meat. Okay, there we are, sirloin. The non-Taurasi, the Aglianico, this is a little bit lighter. Again, we can go to roast chicken. It works beautifully there. So, and there's many other options as well. So let's talk about some of the most famous producers now from Irpinia. And the most famous, without question, is Mastro Berardino. And you see on the label there, the date on the bottom, 1878, and they actually go back to the 1700s. The name of the family originally was called Berardino, and they added the term mastro, which means master, because they were designated as like they were the finest grape growers in that area. So they were the master grape growers. So that's the name of their family now. It's called Mastro Berardino. And that word radici is a wonderful term. It means roots. And this is their famous Taurasi. And that's they make several different styles of Taurasi. This is their most famous one, their black label that you'll find throughout the United States in different stores. And that is a picture of Piero Mastro Berardino. And I thought, since we're talking about tradition and heritage here, I would put the picture in black and white. But the date there, 1878, that's when they started their export business. As I mentioned, they were growing grapes and producing wine back in the 1700s. And he was selling me the story. I mean, they were not only selling it to other parts of Europe, they were even selling it to New York City at that time. You can believe that in 1878. The illustration on top of the label is their winery building in a small town called Tripalda. There's Piero there, who now heads the winery. His father, I don't have a picture of him here. He passed away about 7 or 8 years ago, lived till he was in his mid to late 80s. Was a wonderful man and taught Piero well. And I had a chance to interview him a couple of times, and he had brought out a new example of Taurasi and said, you see, we can still make new wines, but we use the ancient varieties. And that's always been their theme. You will not find a single vine of Chardonnay planted anywhere in Irpinia. You will find almost no Cabernet Sauvignon. You will find a little bit of Merlot here and there, but this is not about international varieties. You do find those things in Tuscany in small percentages. Tuscany is still about indigenous varieties, but Campania really, among all the regions of Italy, is very, very intense with their use of indigenous varieties. So Piero's father, Antonio, decided that after the Second World War, and you can imagine that, Italy was a rather poor country back then, a lot of the revenue went to the war effort. And so there wasn't much work done in the vineyards. The vineyards were in terrible shape. And there was actually some regulation after the war by some of the local politicians to say, well, Greco and Fiano and Aglianico, there's not a future with these. We need to plant things like Sangiovese like they have in Tuscany. We need to plant Barbera like they have in Piemonte. Maybe even look at Cabernet Sauvignon like they have in Bordeaux. And Antonio luckily had a strong enough will to say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to work with our tradition. We're going to celebrate our tradition. And so he, along with several of his colleagues, decided we're going to renovate these vineyards. And what they took cuttings from the older vines that were there from Greco and Fiano and Aglianico, and they took them to nurseries and they propagated them and they replanted. And Antonio Mastrobuonino was the most famous person, but he had a large hand. He's largely responsible for the fact that we can still enjoy these wines today. So the Mastrobuonino family, both Antonio, who's no longer with us, but Piero, who's continued his father's tradition, we have to thank them profusely for the fact that we can still enjoy these wines and still enjoy the heritage, because it's the beauty of Italian viticulture is the fact that they have all these varieties, and the world doesn't need any more Chardonnay or Merlot or Cabernet Sauvignon. I'm sure you would all agree. So it makes it difficult to learn at times, but it's like anything else. It doesn't come easy. And I think learning all these things just, makes us better people. And we get to enjoy all these different flavors. You don't eat the same food every night. Why not have different wines every night? So if you have a chance to visit the winery, they have on the ceiling these beautiful murals. This is actually by a Romanian artist, but kind of their own little Sistine Chapel. I thought that was kind of neat. These murals celebrating Bacchus and the joy of celebrating wine. So beautiful, beautiful winery inside. Okay. The next winery we're going to talk about, and this is now the largest winery. These are the two largest wineries in Irpinia, Mastrobuonino, and now Feudi, or Faudi as they pronounce it, Feudi di San Gregorio. And it's in a little village called Sorbo Serpico, and it's all of about a 15-minute drive from Tripalda. So they're very close. It's kind of ironic because they're the two biggest ones, and they're very, very close. This is Antonio Capaldo. His father founded the winery. His father is one of the most successful businessmen in that area. And he, along with a couple winemakers, founded the winery back in 1986. And I can best define Irpinia at that point as being sort of a sleepy little village, a sleepy little wine community. We had Mastrobuonino and just a handful of other wineries. And really the only one that exported wine was Mastrobuonino. And I know, Romina, we've talked about that. You could only find wines from Mastrobuonino if you were looking for wines from Irpinia up until like the mid 1980s. That's they were lovely wines, but that's all you could find. And I think, you're never going to grow if you only have one winery. Competition's always good, gets the word out. And Feudi has done a wonderful job. One of the things that Feudi did when they started out was they said, especially for the whites, Mastrobuonino was known for its red, for its Taurasi. It's white wines, it's Greco and it's Fiano. They were very, very good wines, but they, at that point, Chardonnay in California was becoming very, very popular, and they were very, full of oak. They were very lush. They were very ripe, apricot-y, tropical fruit flavors. The wines from Irpinia, the whites, were very simple. They were crisp. They were very, very well made, but they were very, very delicate white wines. And so Feudi di San Gregorio decided, let's kind of jazz it up a little bit. Let's make a different style. And so what they would do is they would pick the grapes 1 week or 10 days later, and they would pick up a little more ripeness. It would drop the acidity just a little bit. But these are wines, these are grapes that have very high acidity anyway. And so he would make a little bit riper, lusher thing that maybe more critics around the world would notice. If you were a traditional Irpinian wine lover, you might say, hey, this is different, I don't like it. But if you were outside of that area, you might say, this is a little more in the style of the white wines that I like. So that was their first innovation. The second was this marvelous design. He went to, they used these ancient tiles that are found on churches throughout Italy. And you see the label there, Fiano di Avellino, the one for Greco di Tufo, which they still use. They still use these labels. And they've done a lot of other things too. I mentioned the Cuzzizzi before, that vineyard, that's a single vineyard Greco di Tufo. I believe that was the first single vineyard Greco di Tufo in Irpinia. There are now other wineries that make that as well. Mastroberardino makes one, the same with Fiano di Avellino. So they were full of innovations, and they really sort of woke up this community. And certainly if they never came along, Irpinia would still be an excellent wine region, and they would still be known for its Taurasi, especially for Mastroberardino. But I think Feudi helped kind of open a lot of eyes. And we talked about that explosion before, the number of vineyards planted, number of new wineries. A lot of that kind of goes back to what they did at Fieri di San Gregorio. So they deserve a lot of credit. Another producer is Donna Chiara. And this is one of the proprietresses, if I can say that right, along with her mother. Her name is Ilaria Petito. And she is a wonderful spokesperson for Irpinia and for the wines of Campania. She makes a wonderful example of Fiano di Avellino, really all of them. The Greco di Tufo is terrific. They make a lovely Taurasi. They make a Irpinia Alianico, which has been written up in Wine Spectator many, many times. I think a few years ago, it was one of the top 100 red wines of the year. It's a wine that's maybe about $20, $22 a bottle. Lovely wine. So one little inside story there. This is the picture I took of her in the cellar, and she's not camera shy. There's a few, Romina took out one of my photos. I guess she wanted to keep this a little more serious, but she's a lovely woman. There's no question about that. And so every once in a while when I go there, I get an email from one of the producers saying, Tom, why don't you come visit us? And then they catch themselves. They're like, oh, we know why you're not visiting us. You're visiting with Ilaria. So you can't blame me. You can't blame me. But I mean, the wines are great too. It was just a lovely woman. I'd love to spend some time with her having lunch, and she's married to a very successful soap opera star. So I have no thoughts about spending any time with Ilaria except for tasting wine and having lunch. But she's an absolutely charming person and is a wonderful spokesperson, and her wines are fabulous. This is a relatively new winery. They were only started in, I think, in the early 90s, 2005, excuse me, even earlier than that. They own 67 acres of vines. They make about 16,000 cases. And what's interesting with them in the United States, many of you may know this, they work only with a retail chain called Total Wine. So if you want to buy their wines, you won't find them in restaurants, but you go to that chain of retail stores called Total Wine, you'll find the Donna Chiara wine. So the last slide here, the last winemaker I'm going to talk about, we mentioned his name before. This is Antonio Caggiano. And I love this photo because this really sums up Irpinia very well. He's pointing to his prized Taurasi there. It's a single vineyard Taurasi. He's right in the village of Taurasi. That's his most famous wine. And then his other finger is pointing to his heart. So it's like, here's my most famous product. I made it with my heart. And I think that represents what all of these great producers, large or small, are all about in Irpinia. So any questions from anyone? Or Romina, do you have any questions?
Yeah, let's see. Oh, okay. So if you go, Tom, if you go away from, sharing mode, yeah, you can see the question. One thing I want to share with everyone is that, Campania has the highest number of vitigni autoctoni. So the highest number of indigenous grape, okay, on all Italy. And also I want to share that Campania is the district of Campania that Tom talked about are the last one picking up, all the grape from Italy, because their wine takes a long time to ripe. So they pick their grapes kind of the end of October, beginning of November. So that is one other characteristic. And also I like their appellation system, I think, because it's really simple, it's straightforward. in the sense that, for each appellation comes the territory and comes the varietal of the grape.
There's one question here that Cheryl wrote about those labels from Vaiudi. Are these paintings or paintings of mosaics? I believe they're the paintings of mosaics, but these days, they came up before, I think, scanners, but these days they can, take a picture of the mosaic and they have the reproduction in the book and they scan it and everything. But it's I believe, a painting of the mosaic. So, and they're from some of the most famous churches. I don't have that information as to which church, but I think they're just lovely. So, Romina, go ahead.
Yes. Anyone who want to ask a question, please, go ahead and write in the chat.
And I'm gonna enjoy a glass of Fiano di Avellino. So
cheers, chin chin, everyone. Chin chin. Buona festa del papà. I have some. I
see some red wine there. Hopefully some Aglianico. So
yes, for sure. I'm sure they have vino.
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
And Aglianico. I have some question. For example, when we're talking about the difference between Taurasi and Nebbiolo, because the Taurasi is the Nebbiolo of the south. Do you know the difference between the two?
Well, there are two of the three most tannic varieties in all of Italy. There's another one called Sagrantino, which is grown in Umbria. So there have been people that have been writing in Italy, or actually not so much Italian wine writers, but wine writers from the United States and from England, and they call Taurasi the Barolo of the South. And they mean well, but it's the people in Campania do not like that, because they're thinking, well, Barolo is the better wine. Then no, it's just as well. I would say if there's a difference, it's that, and I use these terms, I never know these days, people get offended by things, but I think if we're all wine lovers, we've heard these terms. There are masculine wines and there are feminine wines. Barolo, as powerful a wine as it is, really has a feminine side to it. It's very charming. You can drink it when it's young. It's certainly much better when it's 10 years old. Aglianico, it's very difficult, especially when Taurasi, to drink that wine young. It really needs a lot of time. And one of the neat things that people fall in love with Aglianico, and I wrote this in an article years ago. I wrote an article for Savoir magazine, but it said a confectioner, somebody maybe like chocolate covered cherries, would love this wine, because literally what you get in the ripest years and in the most pure examples, you get bitter or dark chocolate and you get black cherry. Those two aromas just jump out of the glass at you. That's what makes Aglianico so neat. But definitely is a tannic wine and definitely needs a little more time. And one other point about the ageability, I was fortunate enough to be invited by Piero Mastroberdino, and this is when his father was still alive. We went to the cellar one year. This was in 2012. And he brought out one Taurasi from 6 different decades back to the 50s. And the first wine was in 1957. This was 2012. And if my math is correct, that's 55 years. And there were 12 of us. We were all amazed. We couldn't believe how fresh this wine was. Obviously the wine had been in the cellar in optimal conditions, in cool conditions. It had not been moved all these years. So that had something going for it, but still a 57-year-old wine that was in incredible shape. And we had a 1964, we had a 1970, and it was one of the most amazing tastings that I've ever been to. I could do a whole hour on that, but I was very fortunate to be part of that. So it's definitely, if it's a wine that if you really want to invest in something and lay it away for 20 years, that's a great thing to do. And the 2016 vintage is just being released now. You have Antonio Caggiano there. What vintage you have there, Romina?
2009, so I just have to wait 10 more years. Basically.
Exactly, esatto. See, yeah. And 2009 was an average year. It was not a great year. The current release that just come out is 2016. The 3 years is the minimum, but they're usually released at about 5 years. So 2016s are out now, 4 years or 5 years. That's a superb vintage for Taurasi. So if you can find that, it's expensive. They're $65, $70, $80 a bottle, but they're worth it if you have that patience. I see more questions. Go ahead.
There are more questions. In fact, they want to know about Piedi Rosso and also about climate change, how it's affecting this area, Piedi Rosso as a, grape.
Yeah, in 2017, it was an incredibly hot year all over Italy. And I talked to several producers down there that said it wasn't that bad in Campania, again, because those mountains, the Picentini Mountains in Irpinia anyway, surround them and kind of trap the climate in there. So they get a lot of rain. So it wasn't as bad there. It wasn't as bad. So climate change is affecting a little bit, but again, they're all on hillsides. Almost nothing is planted on valley floor. So you want higher elevations for climate change. So I saw a question about Piede Rosso. Most of it is made as a single varietal further to the closer to the sea. In the province of Napoli, there's a little area where you find a lot of great examples of Piede Rosso. In the Irpinia, you find it normally blended. You don't find it too much, but it is planted there. So, and there was a question about Irpinia being close to Vesuvius.
Yes, exactly. About the volcanic soil, the fact how it affects.
Well, definitely the lava flows over the course of several thousand years. There are many parts of Irpinia. That's a great question. I should have mentioned that with the volcanic soils, and that definitely gives the red wines there a very strong flavor to them, a very distinct flavor to them. But I mean, you're 30 miles from Mount Vesuvius. I didn't mention that before when I was talking about Napoli, but which is the dominating. Once you get within 10 miles of Napoli, even 15 miles, you start to see Vesuvius, and it's extinct now. That reminds me that Etna just had a big eruption about 4 weeks ago. I don't know if people saw that in the news. That's over in Sicily, but definitely all these lava flows have come and affected the soils in Irpinia as well. So,
and there are three volcanoes in the area. One is Vesuvio, one is Rocca Monfina, and one is Vulture. These are kind of the three kind of volcanoes are making that kind of protection against the cold wind.
Right, and Vulture is in Basilicata, which is the region to the just the neighboring region, but it's not too far from Irpinia, right?
Yes, in fact, the question is the difference between the Aglianico that is grown in Vulture area in Basilicata, and also the Taurasi and the Taburno that are grown in Campania.
The people I talked to, because I did write about this, the people in Taburno, and Taburno is a small growing district in Benevento, which is the province north of Irpinia, of Avellino. They admit that their wines do not age as long. Okay. And they really have a lot more volcanic soil there. You really get that minerality in a red wine, a lot of very strong flavors to them, but the wines don't age as long. As far as Basilicata, the wines do age, and they're a little more elegant. I would say that not that the wines of Taurasi are not elegant, but when approachable when they're young. So very fruit forward, very intense. And those are priced a little bit less than Taurasi, because they're not as well known, but they certainly have the same thread in terms of flavors. But those two wines are a little bit lighter and more fruit forward than Taurasi.
Okay. Another question about Coda di Volpe, if you can describe the characteristic and the flavor of Coda di Volpe.
Yeah, most examples, and I didn't really talk about this too much, but almost all of these whites are aged in steel or cement. They do not receive much oak treatment. There are some Fiano now that are getting some oak treatment, but almost all the whites are in steel. And I've never seen a Coda di Volpe in oak. So it's steel, so it highlights the aromatics. These are aromatic whites. They're not like Chardonnay, where they're aged in oak, small barrels. So you get pear is really strong in that, and melon. Not so much apple, but pear and melon, and a little bit of citrus fruit. And it's not a really big explosive wine, so it's normally blended. But a few producers, like I showed before, like Terradora, a few other ones, Milena Pepe, in small production, small lots, that makes some very, very fine wines. But very straightforward, kind of melon and pear.
Yeah. The other thing,
and the acidity is not quite as high as Greco or Fiano, but good acidity.
Yeah. Antonio Capaldo also talk about how it's important, like the refining process, after the grapes are collected. For him, is the 90% of the work. And for them, they invested so much in their, different kind of 500 stainless steel, so they can keep each single variety, separated. That was one point that he really believed in. I have another question: is all this wine are available in the United States, and also yes. Why don't we see Coda di Volpe in the market? Why don't we see it?
Well, first of all, the producers I chose, we talked about this with Romina and Tiziana with the Cultural Center. I wanted to make sure that these wines were available. I mentioned Luigi Tecce just in passing. it is available here, but in such tiny numbers, it's not even worth talking about except for a reference point. But the wines that I focused on, Donna Chiara at Total Wine, and then Mastro Bernardino and Feuilly di San Gregorio both have national importers. And that's not the case with most Campania wineries because they're too small. If you're a national importer, you've got to have a lot of product to reach big cities around the country. So yes, these wines are available. As to why you don't see Coda di Volpe, the Terradora is also with a national importer called Vias, V-I-A-S, and they do import the Coda di Volpe. It's just a matter of, I think there's just not much demand for it. But I think if people were to try it, but they have a tough enough time selling Greco di Tufo. So Coda di Volpe is sort of, kind of the insider's guide to Irpinia. If you know Coda di Volpe, you really know the wines of Irpinia, but it's just not much demand for it. But there's some lovely examples. I like it a lot.
Yes.
And I saw one question about rosé. Feuilly and Mastro Bernardino do make rosé. I don't think that Donna Chiara makes one. I've seen a few rosés from other producers in Campania, and Alianico makes a great rosé. If you think of rosés and you think of, for example, the really pale ones, pink, like from Provence, those are the big famous ones now from France. A lot of people like those. I like a little more deeply colored, more powerful rosés. And Alianico Rosé, Rosato can be great. So here's one example. I didn't mention this. I don't know if can you see me anymore? I'm not on, you see the bottle? I don't know. This is a sparkling wine from Feuilly called Dubla. It's a project they have. This is Alianico Rosato. And they actually, people that know Champagne, they started this project with a small producer called Anselm Celos back in Champagne, and he's no longer with the project, but there's also some very nice sparkling wine, and these are made in the classic method. So just as they make the wines in Champagne. Yes.
One thing also Campania seems to me that is trying to focus on the white wine. For them, the future is the white wine. Do you agree on this statement?
I think that's where there's, they have two different strengths. The red wine, it's one wine, it's Taurasi. The Alianico is the $15 to $20 ones. Those are, have their place in retail and glass pours. And it's a way for people to learn about Taurasi without spending the money, but it's all about Taurasi. It's like Piemonte, it's, you have Barbera and Dolcetto, but it's about Nebbiolo, it's about Barolo and Barbaresco. But a journalist who lives there told me, he said, Tom, this is white wine territory. It's all that rain. So he thinks, and as do a lot of the journalists in Campania and Irpinia, this is a white wine territory, so that the whites are, the Greco di Tufo and Fiano di Avellino they're real stars. And you certainly can't argue that. And you can't say that they're the only stars because Taurasi has become world-class. And I think that's with any wine region around the world, with some exceptions like Germany. But red wines always seem to carry a little more importance. But these are fabulous whites. And a lot of people think about Friuli and Alto Adige with their whites, great whites as well. These whites compare, if they're at least as good as the best whites of Friuli. And in my mind, these are the best white wines of Italy.
Yes, for sure. There is a lot of international vibe for, cuisine with the white wine right now. So it seems like the Campania wants to invest moving forward with the white wine. This is what, from my, kind of understanding.
I agree. And just, I think you would agree that you've seen it. I know some people here in the wine business would see it too, that there's a lot more emphasis on white wine, on healthy eating. And, the whites have less alcohol. So everything about them is lighter, but there's a lot more, the big, rich, heavy meals are more for special occasions, and more everyday dining is for lighter meals. And so white wines.
Okay. Do you have anyone else has any more question for today? Otherwise, we want to thank you, everyone, to be here. Thank you, Tom. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Grazie mille di essere qua e buona festa del papà a tutti. E, anche chi si chiama Giuseppe. Also, the name, if you have name Giuseppe, is also your, festivity too. So, buon papà, buona festa papà. Grazie a tutti e buona serata. Ok? Ciao Tom. Grazie mille. Okay, grazie.
Buona serata, Romina. Ciao,
we learned a lot. Okay, thank you so much for everything. Okay, it was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Prego, grazie.
Grazie a tutti. Ciao a tutti. Ciao a tutti. Okay.